Hello, I hope you find this story interesting. It's about choices, sacrifices, and unexpected consequences. Subscribe to not miss news stories and leave your comments. Tom sat on a folding chair in front of his trailer. In his hands, he held a photographing his old home, a cozy two-story house with a large garden that he had tended for years. This house was a symbol of stability and family happiness, but now it is just a memory. A year ago, Tom's life looked very different. He lived in his house in the suburbs, tended his garden, and spent his evenings with his son Mark and his wife Emma. But one day Mark came home with a serious conversation. Dad, I've got a great idea," Mark said, beaming with enthusiasm. "A business that will change our lives." Tom raised his eyebrows. "I'm listening," he said, though his heart was tight with anticipation. Mark explained that he wanted to open a restaurant. He had found a space in the city center, developed a concept, and even had a partner. But to get started, he needed money, a significant amount. Dad, if you help me, I promise you'll be proud of me," Mark said. Tom was not a rich man. His main asset was the house he and his late wife had spent their entire lives building. This is our home, Mark," Tom said. "Do you realize you're asking me for everything I have?" I know, Dad," Mark replied, "but I promise I'll pay you back with interest." Tom thought about it for a long time. He realized it was a risk, but his desire to help his son won out. The process of selling the house was painful for Tom. He looked through every room, saying goodbye to years of memories. But he convinced himself that he was doing it for his family. It's just a house," he told himself. "The main thing is that Mark will be happy." A few weeks later, the house was sold. Tom gave most of the money to Mark, keeping only a small amount for the trailer he would now live in. Moving into the trailer was not easy. Tom was used to the space and comfort of his home. Now he had to live in a few square meters. It's only temporary," Tom told himself, "and Mark will pay me back as soon as business picks up." Tom called Mark often to see how things were going. At first, everything looked good. Mark talked about his first customers and plans to expand, but something in his voice made Tom worry. Did I make the right choice? He asked himself. Tom sat in front of his trailer, looking at a picture of his house. His heart was full of hope, but also of doubt. Tom was getting used to his new life in the trailer park. His house, with its large garden and cozy veranda, was a thing of the past, and now he had a small trailer parked on the outskirts of town. Tung, a 70-year-old pensioner with a kind heart. Afano had invested all his savings in his son's dream, but now he found himself in a trailer where he has to get used to the new conditions. Mark, Tom's son, a 35-year-old entrepreneur. He dreams of great success, but his business is facing difficulties that he is in no hurry to tell his father about. Emma, Mark's wife, 30 years old, optimistic and friendly. Ananakatha, she is supportive of her husband, but also worried about how this is affecting Tom, Jimmy, Tom's neighbor in the trailer park. He is a 50-year-old former construction worker who also ended up in a trailer due to life circumstances. His rude but friendly nature adds a little humor to Tom's life. One morning, Tom was working outside his trailer trying to fix a water leak. "Need some help?" asked a rough but friendly voice. Tom looked up and saw Jim standing there with a set of tools in his hands. "Maybe," Tom replied with a smile. Jim quickly set to work, and in a few minutes the problem was solved. Thank you," said Tom. "In this park, we help each other," Jim said. "If you need anything, just say the word." Life in the trailer was more difficult than Tom had expected. The water often ran poorly. The space was cramped, and at night you could hear the noise from the road. How do people get used to this? He asked himself as he tried to sleep once again. But most of all, he missed the garden where he loved to spend time. One evening, Tom called Mark to see how the business was going. Everything's going well, Dad," Mark said. "We're expanding the menu and planning an advertising campaign." That's great," Tom replied, but he sounded reserved. Dad, I know you've sacrificed a lot," Mark added, "but I promise it will pay off." A few days later, Emma visited Tom, bringing a home-cooked meal and a friendly smile. "How are you doing here?" she asked. "Anna, I'm getting used to it," Tom replied. "But to be honest, it's not quite what I'm used to." Emma took his hand. "And we appreciate that," she said, "and we'll do our best to live up to your trust." Despite Mark and Emma's warm words, Tom began to feel that something was wrong. His calls to his son often went unanswered, and when Mark answered, his voice sounded tense. What are they not telling me?" Tom thought. Tom stood outside his trailer, looking at the sunset. He was trying to find peace in this new life, but his soul was gnawed by doubt. Tom began to notice warning signs. His son Mark was no longer answering the phone as quickly as he used to, and conversations were getting shorter and more tense. Tom felt that something was going wrong, but Mark avoided answering directly. One evening, Tom called Mark again. "Hey, Dad," Mark answered, but his voice didn't sound as confident as usual. "How's the restaurant going?" Tom asked. Everything's fine," Mark replied, but then quickly adding, "Listen, I'm busy right now, can we talk later?" Tom agreed, but this raised even more suspicions. A few days later, Emma came to see Tom. She looked tired, but tried to smile. "How are you doing?" Tom asked. "Not bad," she replied, "but Mark is very tense about the restaurant." "Why?" Tom asked, wary. Emma sighed. The business is not bringing in as much revenue as we had hoped," she admitted. Tom decided to visit the restaurant to see for himself how things were going. When he went inside, the first thing he noticed was the empty tables. The waiter, who looked bored, greeted him with a friendly smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm just going to look around," Tom replied, sitting down at a table in the corner. He ordered a coffee and watched. Within an hour, only a few people came into the restaurant, and Tom realized that the situation was worse than he thought. Tom noticed that Mark wasn't there, but he saw another man who seemed to be in charge of the staff. Tom walked over to him. "Are you the manager here?" he asked. "Yes," the man replied. "How's business going?" Tom asked. The manager shrugged his shoulders. To be honest, not so good," he said. "We're struggling to stay afloat." Back at the trailer, Tom shared his feelings with his neighbor Jim. "It's like a disaster," Tom said. "And I sold my house for this, and now it's all falling apart." Jim nodded. "A business is a risk," he said. "But maybe your son is hiding something." Jim's words made Tom think. He decided to talk to Mark again, but this time he wasn't going to let him dodge the questions. Tom sat in his trailer, looking at an old photo of his house. He could feel his hope starting to fade. Tom could not stand the suspense any longer. His heart was breaking at the thought that all his sacrifices had been in vain. He decided to act, even if it meant facing the painful truth. Tom invited Mark into his trailer to talk. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. Mark looked tense. "Dad, if this is about the restaurant again, I already told you I have everything under control," he began. "No, it's not," Tom interrupted. "I was there and I saw things were going badly. Why didn't you tell me?" Mark sighed. "I didn't want to worry you, Dad," he said. "It can still be fixed." "Worry," Tom repeated, raising his voice. "I sold my house for you. I have a right to know what's going on." Mark lowered his head but did not answer. The next day, Tom decided to talk to Emma, hoping she would be more open. Emma, you have to tell me the truth," he began. "What's really going on with the restaurant?" Emma hesitated, but eventually confessed. "Mark went over budget at the beginning. We took out a loan to cover the costs, but there weren't enough customers. Now we are struggling to pay off our debts." Tom froze in his tracks. "A loan? Why didn't he tell me?" he asked. He was shy," Emma answered. "He thought he could handle it on his own." Tom decided to talk to the restaurant manager. He went back to the restaurant and asked the man to leave for a few minutes. "Tell me the truth," Tom said. "I know things are not going well. What exactly happened?" The manager shrugged his shoulders. "Mark made a few mistakes," he said. "We spent a lot of money on advertising that didn't work. Plus, the competition is very strong." Tom walked back to the trailer feeling anger and frustration overtake him. How could he hide this from me? He thought. Nay, he realized that his son did not want to hurt him, but hiding the truth only made things worse. Tom shared his feelings with Jim. It's cruel, he said. I've sacrificed everything, and he doesn't even trust me. Look, Jim replied. People make mistakes, but you need to decide what to do next. Do you want to help him, or do you want to let him pay the price for his decisions? Tom sat in his trailer looking at old photos. His heart was torn between his love for his son and the feeling of being betrayed. Tom knew he couldn't take the lie anymore. After talking to Emma and the restaurant manager, he decided to confront Mark directly. The truth might be painful, but Tom needed to hear it from his son. Tom invited Mark to his trailer. The atmosphere was tense. We need to talk. Tom began as his son walked in. Mark sat down, looking tired and anxious. What happened? He asked, trying to remain calm. I know you've been hiding the truth from me, Tom said. I know about the loan and that the restaurant isn't making any money. Mark froze in place. Dad? He began, but Tom interrupted him. Why didn't you tell me? I sold my house for you, and you didn't even trust me. Mark sighed as if he had finally given up. I thought I could fix it, he said. I didn't want to upset you. Upset. Tom raised his voice. Do you realize that I'm living in a trailer now because I believed in you? Mark lowered his head. I made a mistake, he admitted. I overestimated my strength. At first everything was going well, but then we started losing clients. I took out a loan to cover the costs, hoping that things would change. But it only got worse. Listening to his son, Tom had mixed emotions. He wanted to support Mark, but he also felt deeply disappointed. Why didn't you come to me earlier? He asked. I was afraid, Mark said. I was afraid you would think I was a failure. Tom took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. We can't change what happened, he said, but we have to do something to make it right. I don't know if that's possible, Mark replied. The debt is already too much. Tom invited Emma to join the conversation. She admitted that she also knew about the problems, but was afraid to say anything to avoid making things worse. We're all to blame, Emma said, but we need to find a way to fix it together. Tom suggested creating an action plan. They agreed to meet with a financial advisor to see how they could reduce the debt and bring the restaurant back to life. Before Mark left, Tom stopped him at the door. Mark, I love you, he said, but you have to realize that trust is the most valuable thing in a relationship, and you've broken it. Mark looked down but nodded. I'll try to make it right, he said. Tom stayed in the trailer, feeling tired and hurt, but also relieved. Now that the truth was out, he had a chance to change things. The situation had reached a critical point. Despite Tom's efforts to understand his son, Mark continued to shirk responsibility and try to avoid making real decisions. Tom couldn't take it anymore. He decided it was time for an open conversation that would set the record straight. Tom invited Mark to the trailer. This time the atmosphere was even more tense. Mark, we need to talk seriously, Tom began. Dad, I've already said everything, Mark replied, trying to look calm. No, you haven't said everything, Tom interrupted. You keep hiding from the truth and hoping that everything will work itself out. I sacrificed my home, my comfort. Tom continued, raising his voice. And what did you do? You hid your problems from me, you lied to me. Mark raised his hands as if to defend himself. Dad, I didn't want you to feel guilty, he said. That's no excuse, Tom shouted. You made it worse by hiding the truth. Mark broke down and confessed. Dad, I just wanted to make you proud. But everything went wrong from the beginning. We overestimated our capabilities. I didn't want you to know that I failed. Proud, Tom repeated. How can I be proud when you didn't even have the guts to tell me the truth? Tom took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Listen, Mark, he said, looking his son straight in the eye. If you want to fix this situation, you have to take responsibility. Otherwise, I can't help you anymore. Mark looked shocked. Are you serious? He asked. Absolutely serious, Tom replied. I'm not going to let you drag me down anymore. Mark looked as if his father's words had stabbed him right in the heart. Dad, I didn't mean for it to end like this, he said quietly. But it's not over, Tom replied. It's a chance to start over if you're willing to change. Tom moved closer and put his hand on Mark's shoulder. I'll always love you," he said. "But love is not about turning a blind eye to mistakes. It's about helping to fix them." Mark nodded, and tears welled up in his eyes. "I'll try," he said. Tom stayed in the trailer, looking at the photo of his old house. He knew that there were still many difficulties ahead, but he also realized that this moment could be a turning point in his relationship with his son. Several months passed after the difficult conversation between Tom and Mark. Living in the trailer became routine for Tom, although at first he thought it would only be a temporary solution. Instead of regretting the past, Tom decided to focus on how to move on with his life. Tom began to set up his life in the trailer. He set up a small garden with potted flowers at the entrance, bought a comfortable folding chair for evening gatherings, and even put an old photo of his home on the wall. "Honey, it's not a house, but it's mine," he told himself, looking at the results of his efforts. He drank coffee in the mornings while listening to the birds sing, and in the evenings he often talked to Jim, his neighbor. Mark arrived at the trailer one Saturday morning. He looked more focused and confident. "Dad, I want to tell you that I've taken action," Mark said. "And how's it going?" Tom asked. Met with a financial advisor," Mark replied, "and we're working on a debt restructuring plan. It's going to be tough, but I'm ready." Tom felt proud, but he was in no hurry to show it. That's a good start," he said. "But remember, words are only half the battle." Emma also arrived that day. She brought a homemade pie and several bags of food. "We know it's hard for you," she said, "but we're very grateful for everything you've done." "Thank Emma," Tom replied. "But the most important thing is that you act responsibly now." Jim, who had become's true friend, offered to help him set up the trailer. "If you're going to stay here for a long time, you need to make this place more comfortable," Jim said. Together, they installed a new awning and repaired a water leak that Tom had been unable to fix. One evening, sitting on a chair in front of the trailer, Tom pulled out an old photo album. He looked through the pictures of his old home, remembering his wife and the times when things seemed simpler. "I've lost a lot," he thought, "but I'm still here, and I can go on living." Late in the evening, Mark approached the trailer with a box in his hands. What's this?" Tom asked. "It's some old family stuff I found in the basement of the restaurant," Mark answered. Tom opened the box and saw an old clock, a scrapbook, and some of Mark's childhood drawings. "I thought you might want to keep them," Mark said. Tom could not hold back his tears. The next morning, Tom woke up earlier than usual. He made himself a cup of coffee and went out on the porch of the trailer, watching the sun rise over the horizon. His life was far from perfect, but he knew he could now accept it for what it was. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel and leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in Tom's shoes?